talk about how to draw this part here. Okay, now here's Autodesk Inventor. Open this up. If you've already done the settings, you can just simply click on part here to start a new part file. If you have not done that, I would go to File and New. File New. My computer is always slow. Come on, computer. Alright, and then this will open. Now look here in the left, you see these different templates. Here's an English template, and that means the dimensions of the parts would be in inches here, as you can see, IN. Here's the metric, and we don't want a sheet metal. Sheet metal is a real thin sheet of metal like a paper. We don't want to use that. We want to use a standard part that's in millimeters by default. So standard millimeter. You can double click on that and a new part will open up. Okay, with now the part open, the very first thing you need to do is to save the part. Okay, your computer will crash, things will fail, and you will want to have saved the parts. So click on File and go to Save As. Now guys, when you save this, you should be very organized. Okay, so don't just save it on your desktop or in some general folder. You should have a folder specifically for this class. You can create that, called Engineering Drawing and Graphics. Now I have subfolders within there for different sections of this class. Here's the lab. You should have a folder specifically for lab 2. Okay, so make a folder for lab 2. And then within that, I even have different folders for different parts within the lab. So this is exercise 2, part A. You can create that folder. And I'll call this, let's say, part A demonstration here. Okay. So save it as a logical name. Alright, now that you've saved it, let's get started. Okay, at first when I draw this, do not follow me right now. What I'm going to do is actually draw the part in a matter of probably 3 minutes. I'm going to go very quickly. My purpose is just to show you the big picture overview of the processes, and then after I finish that, then I'll go through and do it again slowly, and I'll teach on different things that I do, why you should do them. Okay, so right now do not so watch the video, but don't be drawing this in Autodesk Inventor while I'm doing this. Okay, so here's the general idea. Now first, guys, think, how would you draw this? How would you draw this part? What would you first extrude? What sketch would you make at first? Okay, so I want you to get an idea of that in your head, and I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can do it. There's not exactly one right way to draw this, but here's one way. Now I'll go fast here. I'll start a sketch. I'll select a plane to sketch on. Then let's create a rectangle here. Now from this rectangle I can extrude this. There's a base feature. Now from that I can make another sketch. And that's going to make this other part here. I can extrude that. Okay, so you see what I've done. I have this base feature. Now let's go cut a hole here. Well, the hole is on this surface, so I can make a hole. I could add dimensions to actually place that hole. Now let's not extrude it out like this. Let's extrude it as a cut. So let's cut it and make it go all the way through. And there's that. And now I can add some of these rounds that you see here. So I'm basically done with this basic part here. Okay, these are the basic features. Now I can go through and add some of these other complex features. I have fillets here, and then a chamfer. Okay, and then you can see the bottom is shelled out. That's real easy to do. Now I'll show you guys how to do that later, okay, but you've seen this basic method that I did. So I first started with a sketch and I created this extrusion, then I built the next extrusion on top of that, and then made the hole. Okay, now think about another way to draw this. Okay, for example, let's forget the hole. How else could you draw this? Well, another way you could do it is to actually sketch this profile and then extrude in this direction here. Okay, see, watch that. Let's just delete this. Okay, one thing you could do is start a sketch and simply sketch a profile that looks like this. Okay, now from that profile then, okay, I can extrude this to go this way, and there's the basic feature there. Okay, and then from that you can add in your holes. Sketch there, put a circle, extrude that circle as a cut, and there it is. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay, again, I'm creating sketches, making features from that, and just continuing to build the part. Okay, alright, now that's really quick idea. Now I'm going to go through and do very slowly so that you can follow along with me now. Okay, so now you should be here with me and you can follow me step by step. First thing, let's create a 2D sketch, and then you can select one of these planes to sketch on. It doesn't matter which one you do. Okay, I'll select this plane here. Okay, alright. Now there's lots of different types of rectangles you can do if you click the drop down arrow here. The most basic one shows here the 2-point rectangle. I'll use that. Now I want to fully constrain my sketch, so I'm going to start one corner of my rectangle at the origin, and notice that my cursor changes color when it snaps there. So if you click here, this point is not actually locked in. You can move it around. You don't want to do that. Okay, when I start, I clicked out of I got out of the sketch. I can just double click on the sketch over here. Notice I'm not in sketch mode. Okay, what that means, you see here, here's sketch, but it's not active, it's not highlighted. Okay, and notice I don't have the line, the rectangle tools here. Here's the sketch over here in my part browser. I can double click on that, and now this is what's called sketch mode. Notice the sketch tab is highlighted in green, and you see these tools here for creating sketches. Okay, alright, so let's click on this 2-point rectangle. The first point, I'll click here on the green, and now just move my cursor up here and click again. Okay, now notice this bottom line and this line here are blue, but notice how I can move these points around here. Okay, this rectangle is not yet fully constrained. It means the size is not constrained. Now if I click on this point, I cannot move that. That point is locked in place there. Okay, now let's add in some dimensions. I can click on the dimension tool and click on this line, and then click again, and this is a height of 100, and then I can click on this line and make that 60. Click enter. Now notice all my lines are now blue. They're not black any longer. Yours may be a different color, okay, but notice that the lines change, okay? So for example, if I click on this and I click delete, notice how this line turned black here. That means that I can still move it. It's not defined, okay? Now, if I add this dimension back in, let's make that 60. Well, notice it turns blue. That means if I click and move it, oops, sorry. If I press here, if I click here, this means I'm in the dimension tool. So if I click, I would add a dimension, okay? But if I press the escape button, then that gets out of the dimension tool, okay? Now here, if I click and drag it, now I can't move it. This sketch is fully constrained. We want to fully constrain a sketch before we make a feature from it, okay? Alright, so now I finished the sketch. So you can click on Finish Sketch. I can click on this corner here and that will center my sketch, okay? Now the way that I'm rotating it, guys, if I hold Shift, hold the Shift button and then hold the center scroll wheel down, and you can move your mouse and rotate it, okay? Now to shift it like this, if I just push and hold the center mouse wheel, then you can slide it like this, okay? Alright, so let's click that corner. Okay, so now let's make an extrusion, so I'll click on extrude. Now it already knows that, oh, there's only one area, so it's chosen that to extrude. I'm going to define a thickness here of how thick do I want it. Well, I could just type in 10 millimeters here, but I'm going to assign a variable name which will be helpful later on. So let's type in a name called thickness. Now notice it's red now, but let's say equals 10. And what that does is that stores the value 10 in the word thickness here. And now click OK. Alright, so there's the base feature. Okay. Now from that, let's go build the other part here. Okay. Now instead of creating my sketch on one of these planes here, I want to make a sketch that starts on this face. So let's click that face, and you could click this icon, which is creating a sketch, or click up here. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now notice I'm in sketch mode again, okay, and I'm sketching on this face here. Okay. Now if somehow you get out of the 2D sketch, let's say you click Finish Sketch, and you want to get back into it, do not start a new sketch, because that will start another sketch here. Notice you already have a sketch here, so you can just edit this sketch. You can double click on, double click there, and I'm back in sketch mode. Okay. Alright, so now let's go to rectangle, and I'll start it here. Now I want this rectangle to go all the way to the edge of this part here. Okay, so don't click here, but I would click once it snaps to this line, then you can click there. Now notice this rectangle. This line is blue, this line is blue, that line blue. The only one here is black, is this line. That means it's, well, I have not defined this height. But since I snapped it here, well, I can't move it left or right. That's a good thing, okay? So this means this is mostly constrained. Now all I want to do is define the height. So let's click on dimension. I can click this line and this line. Move out here and let's make this 35. Okay. Notice all the lines are blue there. Okay. Then you can click Finish Sketch, and now make an extrusion. from that part there. Now watch this. Remember, since I assigned the variable name thickness to be 10, instead of typing 10, I can type in thickness. And notice it's black. That means it has a number stored to it. And click enter. Okay, so there is this base feature. Okay. Now, let me show you the reason why I name these variable names thickness. If you go over here to the Manage tab and you click on Parameters, something like this should pop up. Now notice these are here's the names of the different parameters. The parameters here are these dimensions. So this was the height, this was the width. Notice here's that variable named thickness, and I have it as 10 millimeters. Now watch what happens when I change this thickness to, let's say, 20. Notice both of these thicknesses change, this thickness and this thickness, because I've linked them together by this name called thickness here. Okay, so if I change that back to 10, then both this distance, that distance, and this distance change because they're both stored in the name thickness. Okay, so this is, guys, what's called drawing with design intent. So if the intention of your design is to make this line always the same height as this line, you would want to use a variable name like I've done. Okay? Alright, now the next thing we need to do is to create the hole. So I'm going to make the sketch on this face here. Guys, you don't have to do it on that face. You could do it on this back face back here as well. Okay, but it's easier to see, I think, from this face. So click on that face, and now click here on Create Sketch. And now let's go draw a circle. Click on the circle. The first point is the center point, and then the next point makes the diameter. Now click Escape to get out of the circle tool. Notice it's all black. It means the diameter is not defined and the location is not defined. Okay, so now let's make constraints to define that. So I'll click on the Dimension tool. Let's click the circle and click the top line. Oop, there it is. And I can make this dimension 20. And now click the circle and here, and again this line, and let's make this one 20. Well, notice it's still black. What's the problem? Well, I haven't done the diameter yet. Okay, so again I can click on the Dimension tool, click the circle, and the diameter is 15. Okay, notice it's all turned blue. That means it's fully constrained. So if I click Escape to get out of the Dimension tool, and I try to move this, I can't move it. If I try to change the size, I can't. It's fully constrained. Now let's finish the sketch. Let's go back to my Model tab here, and I want to extrude. Now, okay, notice it doesn't know what I want to extrude. Do I want to extrude something here? I first need to tell it which area do I extrude. Well, I want to extrude this circle. Now at first it thinks that it wants to extrude out and make a solid, but I don't want to do that. I actually want to make a cut. So look, this means let's extrude to make a solid. This means extrude to make a cut. So let's click that. And notice it goes back the other way. Now, how far do I want to go? Well, let's say if your design intention, here, watch this. Let's say if I make it 2, well, that only extrudes a little bit, maybe 8 millimeters. Well, that's not all the way through. Well, if I make it a little bit further and drag this, now that's all the way through. What if my intention is to make this hole go all the way through? Instead of extruding a distance, the best thing to do is just to say, let's make it go through everything. So that says all right there. Okay, now notice there's not a distance here, so that means it goes infinite in this direction here. And that's kind of what I want. Click OK. You see that? Now what that means is, let's say if I go change the thickness here. Let's say, now where did I make the thickness? I made that thickness on this extrusion. Okay, let's say I want to edit that. Look at this little drop down arrow here in my part browser. Here's the sketch that I made the first rectangle with. I can double click on that and I could change this value here. Let's change it to 120, let's say. Okay, that height changes. Well, what if I want to change the thickness? Oh, that was done by the extrusion. So I can double click on the feature and change this to, let's say, 30. Okay. Now notice my hole still goes through everything. Okay, even though I changed the thickness. And that's good. That's the intention of this design. Okay. So let's change this back to 10. Watch, let's say I did not do through all. Let's say I put distance and I made the distance 10. This is a common mistake. Okay, so watch, this hole that I made, here was the extrusion I made it with. And instead of doing through all, you simply do distance and you type in the distance 10. Okay, well here's the problem with that. Let's say you have a change in your design and your boss tells you, oh, you need to make this line thicker. You say, oh, okay, let's go change this distance and let's go make this distance 20. Well, now look at this. The hole does not go all the way through. It only goes a distance of 10, but now this thickness is 20. Okay, and so, well, now you have to go edit this. And so guys, watch that. That's not a good way to draw. You want your design intention to be captured in your in the way you draw the part. So if the intention of your design is to make this hole go through everything, let's make it go through all. And then no matter what change you make on this extrusion here, even if you made it 100, the hole still goes through all. Okay. Alright, let's change that back to 10. Alright, if you have not saved your part by this point, you should save your part. So let's click save. I should be saving my part more often than I am, right? So you don't lose your work when things crash. Okay, there's the basic part. Alright, let me show you one other thing that was important that I told you about, but you probably did not recognize. I'm going to change my dimension here back to 100. Okay. Let's change this dimension back to 100. Okay, here's my part now. Alright. Guys, remember when I created this sketch here, what did I do? Well, I used this rectangle here. Okay. Let me show you another thing that people often make a mistake on. Okay, let me delete that. Okay, so let's say you wanted to create this next feature on top of here. So I would click here, click sketch, click on this rectangle, click this, and then you just click somewhere over here. Well, notice this is not lot to be the same width here. Okay, and what some people do then is they say, oh, okay, I can fix that. Let's fix that by making this dimension 60. And you say, oh, look here, it's the same width, and this one is supposed to be 35. You say, oh, that's fine, no problem. This actually is a problem, and here's why. Let's say you finish that sketch, you make an extrusion, okay, and then, okay, here you have this part, it looks good, and then your boss comes along and says, oh, wait a second, I want the width to be different, okay? So you say, okay, sir, no problem, double click here, and you make this, let's say you make it 80 now, okay? Oh, what's the problem here? Guys, look, this did not change. Why not? Because I defined the length of this line here to be 60. But the intention of the design is that this line and this line always be the same length. Okay? So that needs to be captured in the way that I draw the parts. Okay, so how can you fix that? Well, under this sketch here, when I made the rectangle, instead of actually assigning a distance here, don't do that. I can click one time on that dimension and then click the delete button, and I've deleted that dimension. Instead, let's use a constraint. And I'll use the collinear constraint here and say, let's make this line collinear with that line. Okay, now notice I did not add a dimension, I used this constraint here. Now I finished the sketch and notice it extended out. Okay, so no matter what distance I make this width, let's say even if I make it, I don't know, 50, finish the sketch, this one also changed as well. Okay, alright. So I know I'm showing you a lot more than just what's necessary to draw this part, but these are principles that will help you do well on the other parts. Okay, let's change this back to 60 as it was. Okay, hopefully you're to this point. Now let me show you how to add in these extra features which are shown here. Okay, you see these one radius, one fillet here, another fillet, and then a chamfer. Okay, so watch this. Here's a fillet tool. Okay, the fillet is a radius of 15, so I'll type in 15 here. And I want to, a fillet just makes it round. Let's make that edge round and this edge round. Okay, these fillets are the same size, so I should include them in this one fillet feature. Now click OK. And here's this one fillet feature. Notice if I double click on here and change this to 10, both of them change. Alright, I can change them both to 30. Both of them change. Okay, this is changing a parameter, and I'm seeing that feature change. Okay. Now there's a chamfer. A chamfer is not a round, it's just a straight cut on an edge. I can click chamfer. Now the distance is 3 millimeters, and I want this edge here and this edge both to be a 3 millimeter chamfer. And you can see what it does here. It just makes a straight cut, and this angle is 45 degrees. Okay, click OK. There's the chamfer. Now the last thing is that you can see here is that it's hollow on the inside. Well, how do you do that? It's easy to do with a feature called the shell feature. Okay, so I can click on shell, and now what the shell does is it asks you now what faces do you want to get rid of. Okay, now look here. You see the bottom face, this edge, and this side is gone. So I can click on the bottom face, and you can kind of see what that does. You can also click on this face and this face as well. Now those faces are gone, and I want to make the thickness, which would be this distance here. Let's make that distance 3. Now look at that. There's our finished part. Okay. Alright, guys, the last thing, don't forget to actually assign the iProperties. Okay, here's what I mean by that. So here I've saved the part. Go to File and iProperties. This is basically where you save information about the part. So the title, let's name it Lab 2, Exercise 1, say Part A. You can put your name here. I'll put in my name here. The company, UKH maybe. You could even make a comment here that this is my first part ever in Autodesk Inventor. Okay, whatever comments you want here, this is a good place just to, you can write anything here. Okay, now these are good notes to help document this part. If you click on the physical tab over here, this one's really neat. You can assign a material. Let's say it's, let's say scroll down here, and or scroll up, sorry. Let's say the material's in aluminum. Okay, aluminum 6061. Click on that. And notice it tells me what the mass of this part would be, even what the volume is. Okay? That's really neat to see. So you can get an idea of the mass of the part before you ever actually physically create it. Okay? Click OK. This should not pop up for you guys. Sorry about that. I have a problem with my computer, but click close, and then you should be fine here. Okay? So now click save, and you'll be good to go. So we've finished that part, guys. So think about the things that we've learned in creating the sketches. How do we edit sketches? How do we edit extrusions? Okay. How do we constrain parts, or how do we constrain sketches before I make a feature? All right. So I hope that was helpful. So now use this, the skills that you learned here, to try to work on the next part.